You're not special just because she's pregnant, Brenda Howcroft snapped, lips tight, clipboard raised like a weapon. Rules are rules. That car is parked illegally. She said it like she hadn't just watched Leah slide into the passenger seat 30 minutes ago, pale and shaking from another dizzy spell. She said it like towing a woman in her third trimester was just business as usual. The tow truck crept closer. Brenda crossed her arms. We gave you your notice. This is enforcement. I stepped between the bumper and the truck. Touch that car, and you'll be violating state easement protections tied to this parcel, Section 44941 of Georgia Code. The vehicle's occupied by a high-risk medical patient. You tow her, and I press charges. Her eyes narrowed. You wouldn't. Behind me, Leah shifted in her seat and cracked the window open. She looked exhausted, the way she did when the doctors warned her about elevated pressure and the risks of standing too long. And now Brenda, the president of the Magnolia Crest HOA, was willing to gamble with her safety for a parking violation. I dropped my voice. Karen called the cops on my pregnant wife. The sheriff saluted her instead. That's the headline you're writing. You sure you want to publish it? If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. My name's Dan Reimer, civil rights attorney. I've buried more unlawful citations than she's filed. I don't lose sleep over board meetings. I rewrite the bylaws when they try to bully families like mine. My porch swing? My father built it with his hands. Brenda tried to have it removed last fall, said it wasn't part of approved visual design. I said it was part of my family's story. And my wife? She didn't serve 2 tours in a combat hospital to come home and be treated like a nuisance by someone who thinks a clipboard grants authority. Leah's been through hell to carry this child. We lost the last one to complications. This time, every meal, every walk, every heartbeat has been carefully planned. Her OB nurse even advised against standing in the mornings due to her orthostatic symptoms. Today, she followed that advice curled up in the car while I got her prescription from inside. That's when Brenda passed by with her phone out. She didn't ask, she didn't knock. She just snapped a photo, filed a violation, and called in a tow because a car in our own driveway was unsightly before 7 a.m. Now my wife was watching this unfold with her hand on her belly, pretending she wasn't scared. Let them do it, she murmured. It's not worth it. I shook my head. They're not doing this, not to you, Brenda gestured to the tow driver. I'm within full rights to have that vehicle removed. Section 4C of Community Parking Code. No inoperable or unmoved vehicle shall be visible beyond 24 hours. The engine runs, I said. The car moved this morning. It's medically occupied. It's a violation, I leaned in. Number, what you're doing is the violation. That's when the siren chirped behind us. A cruiser pulled up. Sheriff Holden McRae stepped out, looking between Brenda and me. Finally, her grin returned. Thank you, Sheriff. I'd like you to witness this obstruction and take formal record. But he didn't look at her. He looked at Leah, then walked straight past us and saluted. Leah Reimer, he said. Didn't expect to see you like this. She smiled faintly. Just a rough morning. You need anything, ma'am? I just need to sit. 5 minutes. You've got 10. Hell, I'll shut down the street if you need it. Brenda opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The neighbors had gathered, some recording, some whispering. I didn't turn toward them. I stayed facing her. You were saying something about violations? I asked. Brenda's face went white, and the war officially began. Brenda didn't say another word that day. Not to the sheriff, not to the neighbors, not even to the tow truck driver. She just turned on her heel and stalked down the sidewalk like the whole scene hadn't happened. But I saw the tremble in her hand when she dropped her clipboard. That mattered. Leah stayed in the car another 10 minutes, her eyes closed, one hand resting on her stomach. Sheriff McRae lingered nearby without saying much. He knew what this neighborhood had become. Later that evening I walked the cul-de-sac, looking at other driveways. 3 had garden hoses left out. 1 had a work truck parked half on the curb. A few porch flags weren't HOA-approved colors, but none of those got citations. None of them had ever been threatened with towing or called obstructions. Just us. We weren't the only ones who had noticed. 2 doors down, the Duncans' quiet couple, mid-60 seconds, had gotten fined last month for putting a hand-painted wooden sign in their flower bed that said, "Welcome home, Jacob." Their grandson was returning from deployment. Brenda issued a $150 violation for non-conforming signage. Last fall, a single mom named Amy got written up 3 times in 2 weeks, once for her son's skateboard left near the garage, once for leaving a bag of groceries on the porch too long, and once for unapproved Halloween decor that consisted of a paper bat taped to her window. It wasn't random. Brenda had a pattern, one she was proud of. Enforce enough small rules, and people stop fighting back. That's how she operated death by 1,000 regulations. I still had the copy of our own violation history. The first came 2 weeks after we moved in. Something about Leah's garden planter being too visually dense. That was before Brenda knew who we were. After Leah spoke at a community meeting about accessibility and parking accommodations, the citations started to pile up. The HOA bylaws were vague, deliberately so. Most violations cited clauses like maintain neighborhood uniformity or avoid disruptive aesthetics, terms with no measurable definition. I'd seen abusive language like that before in courtrooms and in backdoor contracts. Now I was seeing it on front porches. What Brenda had was a culture of compliance, not a legal structure. That made her dangerous. I walked past the clubhouse. A new flyer was taped to the bulletin board out front. In large bold font, order preserves peace, compliance ensures harmony. Magnolia Crest Board of Directors, Brenda's latest slogan. Underneath it, a list of new policy clarifications. Most of them were just regurgitated language, but one section caught my eye. Enforcement authority and discretionary powers of the board president. The wording was precise, legal sounding, as if she'd had it written by someone with a law degree. But I hadn't seen that clause during the last charter review. Back home, I pulled out the HOA charter copy we received when we bought the house. My version had no such section. In fact, the only enforcement language required board votes for escalations. I kept my hand on the page a moment longer. If Brenda had rewritten parts of the charter without a formal vote or without quorum, that wasn't just misconduct, it was illegal. I'd need to be sure. If I jumped too early, she'd twist it as slander. But if I waited too long, she'd bury us in technicalities and retroactive approvals. Across the street, I saw the maintenance truck parked near the hydrant. Tony Myers stepped out, clipboard in hand, dragging a trash bin toward the clubhouse. He paused when he saw me. For a second, we just stood there, the swing creaking behind me like a metronome. Tony looked down at his feet, then back at the clubhouse, then at me. He didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. I watched his hands. They hesitated over the clipboard before he shoved it under his arm. Brenda was making him check every yard this week. Something about re-verifying compliance baselines. A purge. And from the way Tony's jaw clenched as he walked past me without a word, I knew one thing. He didn't like it. But he was still doing it. The ones who obey silently always break first. I didn't know when, but I knew Tony would crack. And when he did, I'd be ready to catch the pieces. 2 days later, Tony Myers showed up in our yard with a clipboard, a tape measure, and the kind of body language that told me he hated every second of it. He didn't park in the driveway. He left the HOA utility cart idling halfway down the street, like he didn't want it seen near my house. Smart, cowardly, but smart. I watched from the porch swing. The sun was beating down hard, Georgia heat curling off the pavement in slow waves. Leah was inside resting again, doctor's orders. Her blood pressure had spiked the night after the tow truck incident. Tony approached the walkway like it was made of glass. He stopped at the edge of the grass, pretending to examine the border between the lawn and the stone pavers. Clipboard in hand, pen tapping. He crouched, measured the length of the walkway tiles, glanced at the color of the mulch. Not once did he look me in the eye. "Looking for something specific?" I called. He flinched slightly, then stood up, adjusted his cap. "Routine compliance review," he mumbled. "I see. Are you looking for violations or inventing new ones today?" That earned a slight twitch of the mouth, not a smile. Something closer to shame. "No comment," he said, eyes still down. Then he scribbled something on the clipboard. I stood, walked to the edge of the porch. The swing creaked behind me. "You know she's pregnant, right?" Tony gave a short nod. "You know she nearly collapsed last week. The doctors got her on bed rest now. Brenda's still trying to ticket us for shade cloths over the window." He hesitated, shifted his weight. Then, finally, he looked up. "I don't write the violations," he said. "I just record what I'm told to." "Not entirely true," I said. "You choose what goes on that clipboard. You choose what to pretend is non-compliance." His jaw tightened. "You think I like this?" Think I signed up to patrol neighbors like some damn code cop? No, I said quietly. I think you got stuck. And now you're hoping no one notices. He looked away again, but this time his eyes landed on the porch swing. I watched him process it. The wood was aged, hand-sanded, carved initials still visible near the joints. My father's work. The same swing Brenda cited last year for unapproved structural decor. Tony had been the one who left the violation slip in our mailbox. He stared at the swing longer than he should have. I remember when he built that, he muttered. Didn't even use a power sander. Just hand tools and grit. I didn't respond, just waited. He wrote something else on the clipboard, more slowly this time. Then, too quickly, he said, "You didn't hear it from me, but they're re-voting on charter provisions this month. Retroactive ratification. Brenda's trying to clean the books." I tilted my head. Retroactive? For what? He shrugged, but the motion was stiff. Enforcement powers, discretion authority, stuff that's been, let's say, informally implemented. And you're checking every house in the meantime? He didn't answer that. But when he turned to leave, he hesitated again. "She said anyone who asks questions is risking their role," he said over his shoulder. "Maintenance staff, too." There it was, the internal fracture. He walked back to his cart slower than he arrived. But before he climbed in, he pulled something from the passenger seat, walked halfway back and left it at the edge of our lawn, just enough distance to pretend he'd dropped it. Not enough to look accidental. A folded flyer. Magnolia Crest HOA, bylaw amendment proposal, enforcement clause revisions. No signature, no timestamp, no vote record. Just a draft. With Brenda's handwriting in the margins. I didn't pick it up until he was long gone. When I unfolded it, the swing behind me creaked again, faint, rhythmic, like breath through old lungs. Tony wasn't ready to take a side yet, but today, he wobbled. And if a man wobbles long enough, eventually, he falls. 3 days later, the letter came. It wasn't folded. It wasn't mailed. It was hand-delivered, slid under our door sometime between midnight and dawn. Thick envelope, HOA seal, embossed in gold. Inside was a formal notice of non-compliance and escalated action. Brenda had taken the gloves off. 4 new violations, 2 of them retroactive. One for refusal to cooperate with community enforcement, another for verbal intimidation of HOA staff. The third targeted the porch swing again. Unapproved structural fixture visible from common space. The fourth, unauthorized use of the driveway for idle medical activity. I read that one twice. Leah sat at the dining table across from me, hands resting low on her belly. She was calm on the outside, but I could see the ripple of tension in her fingers. Her OB had increased her monitoring schedule. Her blood pressure had climbed again. "She called my health a violation," Leah said quietly. "She called your rest a violation," I corrected, which is worse. It wasn't about us anymore. Brenda wanted a public example, a household she could hang up like a warning sign, one that made the rest of the neighborhood too afraid to fight. I flipped the page. At the bottom was a thread of lien filing. Brenda claimed unpaid fines exceeding $3,000, fines that had never been itemized, never even formally delivered. She gave us 10 days to comply, pay, or face property-level enforcement action. "I want to move," Leah said suddenly. "I know we just got here, but it's like she's circling me." I swallowed hard. I couldn't argue with her. Not in this moment. But I wasn't leaving. Not yet. Not before this was settled. That afternoon, I walked to the clubhouse. Not to file a complaint. To observe. Brenda wasn't there, but her car was parked in the reserved spot, labeled President. The blinds to the main conference room were drawn, but I could hear the hum of a printer through the wall. Someone was in there, running documents. Preparing something. I didn't knock. I didn't enter. I just sat on the bench outside, in full view of the maintenance staff making their rounds. A few glanced at me. Most kept their heads down. But Tony passed by with a pushcart full of paint buckets and stopped just long enough to murmur, "She's stacking retrovotes. 5 board members, only 2 showed up last time." I turned my head. "That quorum?" "Nope," he said. "But she's filing them as passed anyway." He moved on. That night, I reviewed the HOA charter again, the original one signed and notarized when we bought the property. Section 8, paragraph 3. Any material amendment to enforcement policy must be approved by a 2/3 majority of seated board members at a formally convened meeting, with attendance of no less than 67% of voting members. If what Tony said was true, and he wasn't the type to exaggerate, Brenda's amendments didn't hold legal weight. Worse, her enforcement threats based on those changes were completely void. That gave me leverage, but I needed more than interpretation. I needed evidence. So I went to the county records website, pulled the public record of HOA meeting minutes. Brenda had uploaded them monthly until February. After that, nothing. No posted votes, no amendment filings, no charter updates. Yet, I had a flyer from last week referencing a policy that didn't exist in our copy. It was a paper trail, but not the kind that held up under audit. Brenda was operating off authority she never lawfully received. I sat in my office late that night, porch swing just barely creaking in the wind outside the open window. Behind me, Leah slept in the next room, finally breathing steady. I pulled out a legal pad. At the top, I wrote, Magnolia Crest HOA, structural violations of charter authority. Below that, I listed each clause she'd broken. Tomorrow, I'd consult one of my former colleagues, someone who specialized in community association law. But tonight was about drawing lines. Not the kind in sand, the kind written in ink. Morning came heavy with humidity and silence. Leah was still asleep when I left, but I left a note by her bedside. She'd been having trouble breathing during the night, nothing alarming, just pressure and discomfort. We had another checkup in 2 days. I didn't tell her I was headed to a law office. The building was tucked behind a strip plaza in downtown Decatur, clean brick, navy trim, and a firm I used to consult with on municipal zoning conflicts. I knew who I needed to see, Marcella Kincaid. She specialized in HOA charter disputes, particularly unlawful bylaw enforcement. I hadn't seen her since a case we worked in 19, but when I called, she made time. Probably because I used the phrase unauthorized enforcement clause and potential retroactive ratification fraud in the same sentence. We met in her office, where the AC blew too cold and the coffee was always terrible. Long time, Dan, she said, sliding the folder I brought toward her. What's the short version? HOA president pushed enforcement powers into policy without board quorum, posted amendments without votes, then threatened property liens against homeowners based on those illegal clauses. She skimmed. You have the original charter? I handed her our homebuyer packet. She nodded slowly, then flipped to Section 8. You're not wrong, she said. And if she's enforcing changes passed with less than 67% attendance, the changes are void. Worse, if she issued fines or took actions based on those, she's liable for abuse of authority. Marcella leaned back. This flyer's a problem. It has official branding. She's passing those out as if they're legitimate. She isn't just bending the rules, she's impersonating structural authority. Exactly. I watched her underline key phrases. She filed 4 new violations against us this week, I added. One against my wife. She's pregnant, medically restricted. Brenda cited her rest in our driveway as unauthorized idle activity. Marcella's eyes sharpened. Medical harassment on top of procedural fraud. You're building a strong case. I'm not building a case, I said. I'm preparing a cease and desist. I want to trap her in her own process before she adapts. Marcella smirked. So we're playing offense, always. She pulled a binder off her shelf and flipped to a printed form. Start with this. Draft a letter citing Section 8 procedural requirements. Include your evidence of irregularities, and state that any further attempts to enforce voided clauses will result in legal action. I already drafted it, I said, pulling out my own copy. She read it, smiled wider. I forgot how thorough you are. That evening, I returned home with a legal envelope in hand. Leah was in the backyard, gently watering the tomatoes. I hadn't seen her this relaxed in a week. How was the city? She asked. I joined her by the planter. Productive. Quiet. You look like you found something. I did. I didn't tell her the details. Not yet. She needed rest more than revenge. But as I sat on the porch swing and watched her water the soil, I realized something strange. We weren't alone. Across the street, Brenda stood at the edge of the sidewalk, clipboard in hand again, not approaching, just watching. She didn't write anything down, just stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked away. The next morning, the community board email went out. Subject line, Charter clarification and board action timeline. Buried beneath fluffy language was a small paragraph. All amendments adopted prior to March will be re-ratified at an upcoming meeting to ensure clarity and procedural integrity. She knew. She felt the pressure coming. She was trying to cover her tracks before I brought it all into the light. But it was too late. Because that night, as I reviewed the amendment flyer Tony had left me, I noticed something I'd missed before. A side comment in blue ink along the margin. Not typed, not official, handwritten. Pass these before next filing deadline. Confirm quorum later if needed. And below that a single set of initials. BH. That wasn't just procedural failure, that was intent. The blue ink changed everything. Intent meant premeditation. And premeditation meant this wasn't just overreach, it was manipulation of governance for personal control. Brenda hadn't just bent the rules to serve her agenda, she documented the bending. With her own initials. I didn't sleep much that night. I reviewed the flyer 5 times, compared it line by line against the original charter, then cross-referenced Georgia's HOA statute on governance transparency. What she'd done violated both HOA procedure and state law, that much was clear. But what made it personal wasn't the violation, it was how close she'd come to getting away with it. Leah didn't know about the initials yet. I didn't want to burden her. She'd been resting more. The doctor added low-dose blood pressure meds to her chart, and we were monitoring her every few hours. She moved slower now, held her belly like she was guarding something priceless, and she was. Brenda had sent another warning email that morning. This time, it was directed to all residents. Non-compliance cases are currently under administrative review. Continued defiance may result in legal escalation. A reminder that Magnolia Crest HOA reserves the right to act without notice if community guidelines are persistently ignored. That wasn't just posturing, it was a warning shot. She knew I was getting close. By noon, I'd finalized the cease and desist draft with Marcella's firm and scheduled its delivery. But before I sent it, I needed to trigger one final move from Brenda, something undeniable, a show of force I could include in the complaint as the tipping point, and I knew exactly how to get it. I parked my car halfway down the block and walked the rest of the way home. No briefcase, no folder, just me. And when I reached the porch, I did something simple. I hung a banner across the swing. White cloth, black letters, built by hand, defended by law. It wasn't political. It wasn't obscene. It wasn't even permanent. But it was visible. And I knew Brenda would see it. She did. She was outside later that evening when the sun dropped behind the clubhouse, clipboard in hand again, talking to one of the board members near the sidewalk. I didn't hear what she said. Didn't need to. Because 10 minutes later, Tony's maintenance cart rolled up to the edge of my lawn. He didn't get out. He just sat there staring at the banner, rubbing his jaw, debating whether to follow orders or fold. I walked out to meet him. "You can tell her it's temporary," I said. "You can tell her it's within non-permanent display policy. Or you can ignore all that and write me up. Your call." Tony didn't look at me. He reached for his clipboard slowly, then stopped, hands shaking. "Finally," he muttered. "They added a new clause." "What clause?" He looked up at me, defeated. "Discretionary aesthetic interference. Gives her power to override visual displays that disrupt community harmony." I stared at him. "That's not a clause," I said. "That's a leash." He looked sick. But he reached into the back of the cart and pulled out another flyer. New formatting, new date, new section. Amended Visual Display Regulations, Section 12.6b. It wasn't on any of the older charters. This one had been backdated, badly. "Tony," I said quietly, "how many of these did you print?" He didn't answer. That was the last piece. I walked back inside and scanned the flyer. Sure enough, the footer timestamp had been edited. The font didn't match the rest of the document. It was a fake. I added it to the complaint packet. That night, as Leah rested and the swing rocked gently outside, I sealed the envelope. Brenda's name on the top. Cease and desist letter printed on firm white legal stock. And just below my signature, a final line. Any further attempt to enforce unenacted amendments will be considered willful misconduct and referred for civil action. I dropped it in the HOA mailbox myself. By morning, it would be on her desk. By evening, she'd make a mistake. And when she did, I'd be waiting. The next morning came with no thunderclap, no showdown, just the quiet war of silence. No email from Brenda, no HOA notice, No clipboard tapping against our window. Just a subtle pause in the storm. But that kind of quiet doesn't last. By mid-afternoon, I noticed the HOA newsletter had disappeared from the community portal entirely. The amendments page? Gone. The uploaded charter? Replaced by a scheduled maintenance notice. I didn't need a notice to know what she was doing. Brenda was scrubbing, and then came the knock. Not loud, not urgent, just a single set of knuckles rapping twice against the porch post. I stepped outside and found Tony standing there, eyes sunken, cap in his hands. "I didn't come as staff," he said. "All right, I came, because I'm not going to be part of it anymore." He didn't sit, just stood at the edge of the porch like it might bite him. "She told us to lie," he said, voice low. "Said if anyone asked about the revotes, we were to say they happened months ago. Even had me print fake meeting minutes. She wrote them herself." I said nothing. Let the silence fill the space between us. Tony looked off toward the street. I kept my head down too long, watched her push people around. Watched her scare new families, run off the Mitchells over a bird feeder. But this is different. "She crossed a line," I said. "She erased the whole map," he replied. "I've got proof." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a manila folder. It was thicker than I expected. Leah's name was fourth. I felt the rage crawl up the back of my throat, slow and cold. Tony rubbed his eyes. "She said you were setting a precedent, that if she didn't bury you early, the rest would start asking questions. And now you are." He nodded. "I want out," he said. "But I want to help make it right first. You're doing that now." He handed me a flash drive. Everything digital. Emails, drafts, calendar files. She never thought I'd keep backups. I took it carefully. "What made you flip?" I asked. He looked down the street, eyes landing on a kid learning to ride a bike, wobbling past Brenda's trimmed rose bushes. "She started writing up the Gonzaleses," he said. "Because their daughter parks too close to the crosswalk. Kid's 17. First car, barely knows where to place her tires. Brenda said she was disturbing traffic flow." His jaw clenched. "And then she laughed. That was it. That was his crack in the dam." "You might be subpoenaed," I warned. He nodded. "I'll show up. Brenda will try to discredit you. She's been doing that for months already. You'll need to sign a witness affidavit." "I brought one," he said. "Marcella's firm, right?" He'd already called her. I exhaled slowly. For the first time, the playing field felt even. "I'm going to draft a formal motion to suspend her," I said. "If the board doesn't have quorum, we challenge the legitimacy of her presidency outright." "Use my name," Tony said. "Use everything. Just don't stop. I've got neighbors asking questions now. They're ready." He turned to leave, then paused, looked at the swing. "Your dad really built that?" "Every nail," he nodded. "Brenda said it was an eyesore." I smiled faintly. "It's the only thing in this neighborhood that hasn't lied to someone." He laughed short, bitter, real. Then he walked off down the street. This time, he didn't look over his shoulder, and neither did I. By the time the sun dipped behind the power lines, I had the flash drive copied to 3 separate devices and 2 cloud backups. If Brenda so much as tried to deny it now, she'd be arguing against her own fingerprints. Leah was on the couch, her legs up on a pillow, reading quietly when I came in. She glanced at me, eyes searching for what kind of news I carried. I sat beside her and didn't say anything for a while. Just listened to the way the baby shifted under her hand. Subtle movements. Like the child already knew, tension filled the air. "I think it's time," I finally said. She nodded. "Time to file? Time to show them how deep this goes." That night, I wrote the legal equivalent of a scalpel. Motion for temporary board suspension pending investigation. It wasn't a lawsuit yet, but it was a formal challenge, filed directly to the HOA legal liaison and copied to the State Community Oversight Registrar. I cited the lack of quorum in Brenda's claimed amendment meetings, the fraudulent backdating of policies. Her failure to log required minutes under Georgia Code 443232. Her use of internal blacklists, Tony's of the first of the pros, with macantation, document, and the harassment of medically vulnerable residents. At the end of the filing, I requested a board freeze, no enforcement, no amendments, until outside counsel could formally review the matter. But I didn't stop there. The real leverage wasn't in the motion, it was in the timing. Brenda had scheduled her ratification meeting for Thursday night in the clubhouse. No live stream, no minutes. Just a closed-door vote she planned to rubber stamp. I wasn't going to let that happen. The next morning, I printed color copies of every fake amendment I could find before and after versions, each with Tony's corroborating annotations. I drafted a public letter to the community, a time for transparency, why Magnolia Crest deserves the truth. I kept it simple. No legal jargon, just facts, just the timeline, just the violations. I slid one under every door on our street, left copies on the community bulletin board, posted it to the residents-only forum with a pinned comment. Ask yourself, when was the last time you actually voted on the rules you're being fined for? That post hit like a spark in dry brush. Within 2 hours, comments exploded. Wait, what vote? I thought these rules came from the developer. She fined me for my wind chime and said it was board approved. I never saw a ballot. I didn't respond to any of them. I just let the fire spread. That afternoon, I went door to door, not to campaign, not to argue, but to ask one question. Do you want to come to the clubhouse Thursday night, not to be told the rules, but to ask who gave them to us? The responses weren't loud. They weren't angry. They were quiet, direct, measured. But behind those nods and small acknowledgments was a growing current of resistance. Even the Duncans said yes. By sunset, I had 17 verbal confirmations. That was more than half the households on our block. And for the first time, Brenda wouldn't be alone in that room. I went back home and updated the affidavit list. Marcella had agreed to be present in case Brenda tried to shut the meeting down illegally. Tony's witness statement had been notarized that morning. The motion was filed and received. All the pieces were on the board. Now all I needed to do was watch which one she moved first. As I sat back down on the porch swing, Leah came out, blanket around her shoulders. She sat beside me, her head resting on my arm. I've never seen you like this, she whispered. Like what? Like someone who's about to change a neighborhood. I looked at the folded banner still draped across the porch rail. Brenda had called it a disruption, but now it was a signal. Thursday arrived like a fuse already lit. All morning, the air carried a strange charge, like the sky hadn't decided whether to storm or hold its breath. Leah stayed home from her prenatal appointment doctor's advice. She'd been having Braxton Hicks contractions more often, and stress wasn't doing her any favors. So I handled the final preparation alone. By noon, my makeshift war room, formerly known as the dining table, was a grid of labeled folders, tabbed reference codes, scanned PDFs, and printed witness statements. The flash drive Tony gave me was duplicated again and copied to a presentation laptop. I triple-checked that it booted correctly. Marcella sent over the notarized affidavit packet. 10 signatures, including Tony's, 2 former board members who'd resigned last fall, and 1 brave resident who'd been fined for a roof paint color change she never approved. We were ready. But the plan wasn't just legal, it was tactical. At 4 p.m., I met with 4 neighbors who had agreed to help with setup. They weren't lawyers. They were tired parents, retired veterans, and first-time homeowners who'd all been targeted by Brenda's quiet war of paperwork. We didn't discuss revenge. We discussed logistics. Just bring people in, I told them. No speeches, no shouting, let the facts do the talking. The clubhouse opened at 6. The meeting was scheduled for 6:30. By 5:45, cars had started lining the curb. By 6:10, the back row was full. By 6:20, Brenda still hadn't shown up. I stood near the podium, watching the crowd assemble. 17 neighbors became 25, then 30. Whispers echoed. People weren't angry. They were curious, unsettled, and most of all, they were awake. The clubhouse was built to seat maybe 50. By the time the HOA's acting treasurer wheeled in the metal lockbox of ballots, every seat was filled. And then Brenda walked in, hair tied back tight, clipboards in hand. She scanned the room like someone entering a battlefield and finding the enemy already dug in. She didn't smile, didn't greet anyone, just moved straight to the podium and tapped the mic. Thank you all for coming. We'll begin the re-ratification process momentarily. As a reminder, this is a procedural meeting. Discussion is not on the agenda tonight. I stepped forward. This isn't your agenda, Brenda, she blinked. Excuse me? Under Georgia Statute 443232, all homeowners present at an HOA meeting have the right to propose agenda items with majority consent. Let's vote. All in favor of adding a review of board enforcement procedures to the agenda? Hands went up like wildfire. She tried to protest, but the volume in the room shifted, chairs scraped, phones came out, and murmurs turned to unified insistence. She was outnumbered. Marcella entered from the side door and took a seat near the back. Brenda saw her, saw the folder, saw me, and she knew, but she still tried. "Let's be clear," she said, tapping the mic again. "This meeting is not a trial. These documents circulating are incomplete, taken out of context." I plugged in the laptop. The projector came on. Slide 1, Brenda's own handwriting. "Pass these before next filing deadline. Confirm. Quorum later if needed." Initialed BH. Slide 2, her email to Tony requesting backdated minutes to reflect anticipated attendance. Slide 3, the fake amendment side by side with the legally filed version from the county records. Dates didn't match. Titles didn't match. Footers were doctored. And finally, Slide 4, compliance prioritization, memo listing Leah and me as high-risk properties for undermining HOA authority. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was loaded, electric. Then a voice from the middle row. "My name's on that list too." Another followed. "She fined me last month for pavers I installed 2 years ago with approval." Brenda stepped back from the mic. Her hand trembled slightly, and in that moment I didn't feel anger. I felt inevitability. She turned to leave. Marcella stood. "Miss Howcroft," she said, "you are advised not to destroy or alter any HOA records effective immediately. A formal complaint has been filed with the state registrar." Brenda didn't respond. She walked out the side door. No words, no clipboard, no power left. She didn't come back. Brenda vanished out the side door like smoke, and for a long second, no one moved. The projector fan hummed in the silence. Somewhere in the back, someone's water bottle tipped over and rolled against the tile. Then a voice, soft, older, cut through. "So, what happens now?" It was Mrs. Duncan, the same neighbor who once got fined for her grandson's welcome home sign. She sat in the second row, her hands folded tightly around a yellow notepad. Her husband gave her a gentle nod but didn't speak. I stepped up to the mic. "Now," I said, "we breathe." A few chuckles broke the tension, not because it was funny, but because it was real. Then I continued. "This HOA has operated under amendments that were never properly passed. We've been fined under rules that don't legally exist. We've been harassed for imaginary violations, misled about procedures, and discouraged from asking questions. But that ends tonight." I held up the folder of affidavits. These statements come from staff, former board members, and residents. What they describe isn't just mismanagement. It's coordinated deception. What Brenda did, what she orchestrated, violates both our own charter and state law. I let that settle. The good news is, we caught it in time. We filed a motion for emergency board suspension. That motion has already been received by the Georgia HOA registrar and is under review. Until that decision is issued, Brenda has no legal standing to enforce anything. Gasps rippled through the room. Tony stood from the side wall where he'd been leaning. "She threatened to fire me if I spoke," he said. "I was told to issue citations I didn't believe in, but I kept the records. I kept everything. And I'm here because this neighborhood deserves better." That was it. The shift. The neighbors stopped whispering. They started nodding. Then Mr. Duncan raised a hand. "Can we vote for a new interim board tonight?" Marcella stood from the back. "Technically, yes. Georgia statute allows for emergency board restructuring when evidence of misconduct is substantial and confirmed by homeowner majority. You'd need a quorum." "How many is that?" someone asked. 50% plus one of eligible voters," she said. "If everyone in this room lives here, you're already past it." Another pause. Then Amy, single mom, fined for her son's skateboard, stepped up beside me. "I nominate Dan Reimer as interim compliance chair." I blinked. "I didn't come here to run for office. You came here to protect your family," she said, "and you just protected all of us." Hands went up, quiet at first, then more. Vote by vote. The room shifted again. I didn't say yes. Not yet. Instead, I motioned to the display behind me. "I'll serve as interim only, until we install proper transparency. I'll publish every vote, every policy, every change, and I won't enforce a single rule that wasn't approved by you." Marcella recorded the tally. It passed. Brenda's nameplate was taken down from the podium. I handed it to Tony. He stared at it for a second, then dropped it into the trash. Later that night, as I packed up the projector and folders, Leah texted me. "How did it go?" I didn't reply with details, just a photo of the empty podium and a simple line, "It's over. And it's just beginning." When I got home, she was still awake, still waiting on the porch swing, blanket over her legs, the soft rhythm of night insects in the background. She looked at me and smiled. And for the first time in weeks, her hand on her belly wasn't protective. It was peaceful. We'd carved something real out of the mess. Not just for us, for the whole street. The swing creaked behind us as I Saturday, a sound older than this fight, older than Brenda's rules, stronger than all of it. The next morning, the clubhouse parking lot filled faster than I expected. It wasn't just the regulars anymore. It was faces I'd never seen at meetings, young families, retirees, people who usually waved politely but never got involved. Word had spread fast. Brenda's sudden disappearance from the HOA website, the enforcement freeze, the interim vote. Everyone knew something had cracked, and they wanted to see what would rise from the fracture. Marcella arrived 10 minutes early, briefcase in hand, wearing the same calm, unreadable expression she'd worn in courtrooms and boardrooms alike. She nodded to me once and took a seat near the front. Tony showed up late, not because he was dragging his feet, but because he walked all the way from the east end of the neighborhood, handing out printed agendas as he came. When he stepped inside, half the room clapped. I stood behind the podium with a fresh nameplate in front of me. Interim. Compliance Chair, Daniel Reimer. It didn't feel like a promotion, it felt like a responsibility. "Good evening," I began. "This is the emergency session of the Magnolia Crest Homeowners Association, called under Article 4 of our charter. Tonight, we finalize what began as a challenge and ends as a choice." Chairs scraped as more neighbors settled in. "This isn't just about removing a corrupt president," I continued. "It's about reclaiming the process that was taken from us. We'll be discussing policy reversal, board restructuring, and holding a formal vote for permanent leadership next month. But first, there's one final matter." I looked toward the back of the room. The door opened. Brenda walked in, not in her usual stiff blouse and heels. She wore a long cardigan and flats, no clipboard, no entourage, just her. Her face pale but unreadable. A hush fell. She sat in the far back row, alone. I motioned to Marcella, who stood. "As counsel overseeing this transitional period," she said, "I've received the formal cease and desist response from Miss Halcroft's attorney. It does not dispute the authenticity of the documents we submitted. It offers no defense of the meeting minutes, the amendment process, or the enforcement memos." She paused. "Instead, it confirms Miss Halcroft's voluntary resignation, effective immediately, and states that she waives all rights to further board participation." A sound swept through the room. Not relief, not outrage. Something quieter, closure. Marcella Saturday. Brenda didn't move. She stared straight ahead, eyes glassy but fixed. Tony stood next. "I have something to add," he said. I stepped aside. He took the mic with hands steadier than they'd been all week. "I worked under Brenda for 4 years," he began. "I enforced citations I didn't agree with. I watched people get harassed for things that didn't matter, paint shades, wind chimes, mailboxes half an inch too high. I kept my mouth shut because I thought it was just the job." He looked around, but it wasn't. It was cowardice, and I'm done with it. He held up a piece of paper, his resignation from the maintenance post. Gasps echoed. "I'll stay on as a volunteer while you rebuild," he said. "But only under a board that's honest." Someone in the front row stood. "You've got our vote, Tony." Another stood. "You stood up when it counted." One by one, chairs scraped back, and a slow standing ovation grew, not wild, not explosive, just steady. Brenda stayed seated. And when the applause faded, she stood quietly and walked out the same door she'd entered through. No words, no defense, just silence. I looked at the people gathered before me. "Starting tomorrow," I said, "we begin undoing what was done in darkness. Every policy will be reviewed, every vote will be public, every voice will count." And this time, they believed me. As the room emptied and night crept in through the open windows, I sat alone at the podium. I reached down and picked up the old wooden gavel Brenda had left behind. I didn't strike it, I set it aside. Because the sound that followed, the porch swing creaking, a neighbor's laughter outside, a kid's bike bell in the parking lot that was the sound of a neighborhood beginning again. The board held its first transparent vote the following week. No hidden agendas, no backroom deals, no paper ballots slid under doors in the dark. Just people tired, but awake casting votes with raised hands and open eyes. I didn't run for a permanent position. I made that clear from the beginning. I wasn't here to become part of the system. I was here to crack it open, show the rot inside, and give it back to the people who actually live here. We overturned 14 fake amendments, rescinded $21,000 in unlawful fines, voided 3 liens Brenda had initiated. Every single resident received a packet outlining their rights, their voting power, and the procedural process moving forward. Tony helped write it. He didn't leave after all. The board offered him an official oversight role, non-enforcement. His first act was repainting the HOA office door. Gone was the plaque that read, "Enforcement Authority, President Only," replaced with a wooden sign, "Community maintained by community consent." He carved it himself. Leah and I sat on the porch swing that evening as the sun slid below the tree line. The air smelled like wet grass and blooming honeysuckle. She had one hand resting on her belly, the other loosely around mine. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." I didn't answer right away, just listened to the slow creak of the swing and the hum of cicadas waking in the trees. "I didn't do it alone," I said finally, and I meant it. It was the neighbors who stood up. It was Tony who stepped forward. It was Marcella who backed me when I had nothing but a folder and a theory. And it was Leah, always Leah, who reminded me what we were fighting for. 2 weeks later, the new HOA board sent out their first bulletin. No threats, just an invitation. Join us for a neighborhood potluck on the green. No fines, no citations, just community. We brought lemonade. Mrs. Duncan brought cornbread. Tony manned the grill. And as night fell and fireflies danced over the trimmed hedges Brenda once micromanaged, something else happened. Something small, but powerful. People lingered. They didn't rush off. They didn't hide behind hedges. They stayed, talked, laughed. Kids chased each other across the grass without worrying about noise citations or invisible lines in the mulch. We weren't just a neighborhood anymore. We were a community. 1 week after that, Leah went into labor. It was early, but not dangerously so. The hospital was ready. Her doctor, who'd received a formal apology from the HOA for unauthorized driveway idling, was on call. Our fetter daughter arrived at 4:27 a.m. Strong lungs, soft cry, wide, curious eyes. We named her Nora. When we brought her home, the neighbors had tied a simple sign to the porch rail. "Welcome home, Nora, Magnolia's newest voice." I didn't cry until I saw the swing. Someone, probably Tony, had sanded and sealed it. The carvings my father made were deeper now, preserved. Beside them, someone had etched a single new line: protected, not permitted. That swing wasn't just legacy anymore, it was testimony. A reminder that when power goes unchecked, silence becomes complicity. But when even one voice stands firm, one neighbor, one spouse, one swing, everything changes. We didn't move, we didn't sell. We stayed. Because what we built wasn't just a win over Brenda, it was a blueprint for every person tired of being ruled by fear and paperwork. And if you've ever stood on your porch and wondered whether fighting back was worth it, let this story be your answer. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. We're building something together, and you're already part of it.